Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over 1984, Chapter 1, Part 8, the last section of Chapter 1. We're going to be finishing up Chapter 1 today. If you guys remember last time we did Part 7, the big theme about Part 7, and Winston starts off Part 7 with the phrase that he's writing in his journal, in his diary, if there's any hope, it lies with the proles. That's kind of paraphrasing. I'm not going to look back at it, but if there's any hope, it lies with the proles. In part 8, we're going to kind of get a glimpse into prole life. Let's just jump right into it then, guys. Here, we'll go to the first slide. There we go. So we're going to get a glimpse into prole life. How does this happen? Well, Winston gets tempted. He gets out of work one day, and he decides that he's going to skip the plans that he has. He's got plans to go to a community event at the community center. Where have we heard the community center before? But with, what's his name? Oh, I forget his name now. Parsons. Mr. Parsons works at the community center. I think he's like runs it or something like that. He even takes, I almost said bribe, but he takes a subscription fee from Winston regarding one of the community events when they're putting up flags for hate. I think it was Hate Week. We learned about that like in part three or four. So he runs the community center. Winston has an event at the community center, or I don't know if Parsons runs the community center, but I believe he's a part of it. And Winston has an event at the community center, and he's going to just skip town, and he's not going to go to it. All of a sudden, he gets out of work, and he just starts roaming the streets of London. He doesn't catch his bus back home, and he's got an objective here. He's not just roaming around for any reason, because the thought that he had, that he wrote in his diary, is running through his mind still. If there is hope, it lies in the proles. So maybe I did get it right. If there is hope, it lies in the proles. The words kept coming back to him. A statement of mystical truth, palpable absurdity. So he, I think, is trying to go find out. He's seeking out information about the proles. He's seeking out information about if they are to overturn Big Brother in the party, what do the proles bring to the table that can help with that? That can help him, that can help O'Brien with that, anybody else who seemingly is on the same page with the weirdness that is going on in Oceania, because there must have been a better life. And that really is the question here that I think Winston is going to get at. How different were times before the revolution? Because he was still super young. So he's going to actually go and he's going to talk to a few people. We're going to see that in a second. He walks around London. He ends up being pretty close to this place, the St. Pancras station. He describes this in some detail. He was walking up a cobbled street. There's lots of two-story houses, filthy puddles. It's not a very nice area. Narrow alleyways. There's girls in full bloom. People swarming around. People are taking notice to him. Most of the people paid no attention to Winston. A few eyed him with a sort of guarded curiosity, because Winston is wearing his overalls still, which signifies that he is of the party. And he's going to mention that people from the party don't really hang out with the proles. You actually probably shouldn't be caught with the proles in the areas they live, because that leads to a lot of scrutiny. It can get you in a lot of troubles, from what Winston is getting at here. Before we go to the next slide, there's this term I just wanted to bring up, because there's a lot of terms in 1984. Ownlife. Ownlife, it's a newspeak word meaning individualism and eccentricity. basically, it's where you are in your own solitude, but you don't really have an own life in Oceania. And Winston mentions that the only times you're really ever alone are when you are sleeping. Other than that, you're surrounded at work. There's telescreens everywhere. There's posters of the eyes of Big Brother watching you. You don't really have time to yourself. So it is kind of weird for Winston to be walking out alone, especially walking in the areas where the proles live. So, like I said, the locals are very weirded out a little bit that Winston is walking through their town, their neck of the woods. And like he said, it was not really a good look to be seen in a place like this if you're a party member. The people don't really have a hostility. It's not like the people are looking at him to attack him. And nothing like that. Nothing like the Parsons kids attacking him, playfully attacking him, quote unquote. But it's just they're kind of, there's a wariness. There's like curiosity. Hey, what are you doing here? Because you shouldn't be here, kind of thing like that. But all that kind of seems to subside when there ends up being a lot of commotion and actually a bomb warning comes in. And we have heard in the descriptions earlier in chapter 1, in part 1, we heard Winston talk about how the surrounding areas felt like they got hit by a bomb, or like that they were hit by bombs, like bombs were a regular occurrence. So now we're learning the bombs are a regular occurrence seemingly in the places where the proles live. I don't know how often they happen where Winston lives in the Victory Mansions. Seemingly not as much, because a man comes up and starts warning. He starts yelling out, oh, there's an incoming steamer. And Winston actually mentions that he doesn't really know how the guy knows that, but they have like an uncanny ability to predict this kind of stuff. And sure enough, a bomb does end up coming and touching down right around where Winston is. He maybe gets a little bit shaken up by it. So to go back, I don't know how often Winston experiences these bombs. Doesn't seem as nearly as much as the proles do, by the fact that, hey, the proles can kind of sense when one is incoming. Winston may be a little bit more surprised by the fact that it hits. It ends up hitting some houses up from the street from Winston. And this is kind of weird. Winston finds, he walks kind of towards it, around it, towards it, and he ends up finding a severed hand at the wrist. Hand was so completely whitened as to resemble a plaster cast. But here's the thing is, like, Winston does not seem troubled by it. He just kicks it away. And he's like, hey, okay, I'm just going on my merry way now. It's just a severed hand. This stuff kind of happens. And this is kind of the same feeling that you get from the rest of that surrounding area. The bomb hits, people duck for cover, the bomb hits, and then life kind of just goes back to normal. It doesn't really seem that anybody really cares that the bomb went off. It doesn't really seem that Winston actually even cares. He just kicks away the severed hand. He does not seem troubled by it at all. So why are the bombs hitting where the proles live? How often do they occur? Seemingly they occur very often. But why are they incoming, and who is shooting these bombs off in these areas of London, Oceania? So after this, Winston keeps on walking. He finds two men arguing about the lottery. And here we find out some information about the lottery, which is administered by the Ministry of Plenty. And it's really only proles who play the lottery. This is another one of those things that seems like that the proles take part in, but the party members really don't. And there's probably a reason for that, because the lottery doesn't really pay out anything. And yet everybody that's in the proles, that is a prole, pays serious attention to it and pays into it and buys the lottery tickets, and they have fun and they delight in it. And Winston says it's kind of like a stimulant, but it's all kind of a folly because only small sums are ever paid out. And large sums are paid out to non-existent persons. So people who don't even exist, they're going to pay out these large sums to these people, which means that the Ministry of Plenty probably doesn't even really lose money. It just ends up coming all back to them. And then you create this kind of vision that, oh, some people are winning, so I'm going to keep playing because potentially I could be that next victor, that next winner of the lottery. Right? Now, notice that distinction: victory mansions, victory gin, victory cigarettes. But there's no victories around the proles. You don't hear the proles houses being called victories. You don't hear the proles, the beer they drink, because Winston's going to enter a bar here in a second. We're going to talk about it. They don't drink victory gin. They can get a hold of it, Winston says, but they drink beer. And it's interesting there, I just said winner of the lottery. Winner and victory here are two different things. So you're not celebrating a victory, you're celebrating your winnings, as in that they are ever so fleeting. Only small sums are paid out, and I'm sure anybody who wins the lottery is running through those small sums that you win, maybe probably in beer and other extravagant stimulants again. So I thought that's kind of interesting. Here's another thing that I don't think the party members are partaking in, this lottery, but the proles partake in it. So Ned finds himself near the area where he bought his diary, that the ink and the pen that we talked about back in chapter 1. And he's going to enter into a pub, a bar. He spots a very old man entering a pub. And Winston thinks that this is his chance to find out more information about pre-revolutionary times. So he decides he wants to go in there, befriend him, talk to him. He's going to buy him a beer, and he wants to ask him about life before the revolution. Now, again, it was unusual for party members to frequent prole pubs, let alone he's just in an area where proles live. That's weird. But he constantly recognizes the danger of this situation if he were to get caught being in this area. But he just ends up doing it anyway. He's got a mission in mind. He wants to find out what was life like before the revolution. Was it better? That's really the ultimate question, is like, was it better before the revolution? That's what he wants to know, because he's got a weird feeling. And we talked about this in like a couple episodes ago, how Winston said you get this nagging feeling in you that this isn't how life was always like, and it's somehow life was better than what it is right now. But he can't quite pinpoint it. So Winston ends up going in the bar. He buys the man a drink. The man ends up being quite old. I think he said he was like 80 years old. Something like that. Let me see if I can quickly find it. He was very, very old. I might have even, I might have it in the slides. We'll keep going here. Again, they drank beer. He buys them a beer. There's no gin. There's no victory gin, although proles can get a hold of it. The next part of these next two slides are the questions that Winston asks the old man. And this isn't really going to do it justice. I kind of am paraphrasing here. I tried to capture the whole question, but do it in a condensed format. And the old man's responses are kind of longer, so I'm trying to condense those down as well. So take this with a kind of a grain of salt. It's not all encompassing, and I would encourage you to go back and reread this section, but I thought it's important to see the questions that Winston's asking him First being, you must have seen great changes since you were a young man. And really, the goal I did here was that the old man never really answers his questions in a way that Winston wants him to. So by him asking him, hey, you must have seen great changes since you were a young man, Winston is hoping to get a glimpse of like the politics, the day by day, the economy, things like that. But instead, this guy says, well, the beer was better and it was cheaper. Okay, well, this was all before the war. And then Winston asks him, what war? And the guy said, well, it's all wars. There's been a lot of wars. Here, let me see if I can catch up. Oh, here we go. It's all wars. And that's all. Yeah, that's all he says. And he talks very funny too, this old man. He talks definitely in an accent. He is not using Newspeak. It's almost like Winston talks very differently. And then you remember the Newspeak dictionary, the 11th edition that's going to be put out, where the language that even Winston and Syme are speaking, Syme is working on the new Newspeak dictionary, the updated Newspeak dictionary, and Syme is even telling Winston, hey, the way we're talking right now is going to be obsolete. Now look at how the proles talk, and this guy, and you hear banter throughout the areas that Winston is walking, and George Orwell puts it in here. The way they talk is so different. It's a weird accent, and it's almost hard to understand and read it, like what they're saying. He said, like, for example, he says, tall pats, the same thing coming to my head only yesterday. I don't know why. I was just thinking, but you have to see how it's spelled. It's so weird. So it's almost like the proles have their own language and the party has its own language. And maybe that's why Winston can't really get a clear answer from this guy. So we continue on. Winston goes on a long monologue, but ultimately he asks the man about his opinion on the old days. He mentions what he knows from the current textbooks and mentions the capitalists wore top hats. He wants to find out about the old days, but the old man ends up just talking about top hats. It's like, oh yeah, I remember those top hats. And he's like, well, I didn't really ask you about the top hats. I don't really want to know about the top hats. So more questions follow. Do you feel you have more freedom now than you had in those days? Again, we don't really get an answer from the old man, like not a clear, direct answer to his question. They continue, you had to call them sir and take off your cap when you passed them, right? Winston's just trying to corroborate this. He's read this in the textbooks. He wants to corroborate it with the old man, and I guess this time the old man says, yeah, we had to do this. He recalls a story of him doing this. We continue on. Winston asks, was it usual for these people and their servants to push you off the pavement into the gutter? And then the old man goes into a whole story. Instead of just saying, yes, this has happened to me, it happened to me here, he goes into this whole story, super detail about one night at a boat race. One of these guys did this to him. And then he asks him, Winston continues and asks, if you could choose, would you prefer to live then or now? And he's like, oh, well, back then I was younger, and most people would rather be young because you have your health, you have all these things. Ultimately, the old man's answers, and Winston puts here in quote, this is Winston saying this, nothing but a rubbish heap of details. Unanswerable, unintelligible. And he compares it to like an ant, where he says, let me see if I can find the exact, here on page 95, they were like the ant, which can see small objects but not large ones. So he's comparing this to facts. He's like, they can see the small facts, but they can't see the larger picture that they were living in. So he can't even answer his questions. It's just a bunch of little details, but he's not seeing the forest from the trees, so to speak. And he says the survivors can't compare one age to another. Because time, and maybe again, this is why time is such a big thing with the party. This is why they don't have dates. Winston doesn't even know, he thinks he knows when he was born, but he can't really tell. That's because the survivors can't compare one age to another now. How are they supposed to know? Oh, compare when you were a kid to now. Compare 20 years, 50 years ago till now. Well, I don't even know what year 50 years ago was. There's no standard to measure the current situation to. And especially with all these older people dying, there's going to be even less and less of a standard. This guy's like a hidden gem. He's got the answers. He lived back in that time, but he's unable to communicate it with Winston. And I'm sure this kind of frustrates Winston. I'm sure it does. And I've been in situations like this where you're trying to get an answer out of somebody and you just can't. And it's frustrating. Well, Winston leaves and he ends up being close by the junk shop, which is actually where he buys the diary, where he bought the diary in part 1, chapter 1. The shop is called Weeks, and it's ran by a guy named Mr. Charrington, who's another older gentleman, 63 years old. He's had the shop for 30 years. And Mr. Charrington recognizes him. He recognizes Winston. And he kind of gives him a hello. They exchange pleasantries, I guess you will. And Winston notes that the junk shop, well, is kind of just that. It's just junk. There's really nothing of value in there. There's a bunch of different stuff, bunch of different antiques. Let me see if I can get you guys like some of the stuff that was in there. Here, only a small corner, odds and ends, lacquered snuff boxes, agate brooches, and the like. Dusty picture frames, trays of nuts and bolts. Just really nothing that I don't think a party member would really want. We do find out, though, that the diary that Winston bought is of a young lady's keepsake album, a beautiful bit of paper, cream laid. There's been no paper like that made for 50 years. So the diary he bought, very rare, one of a kind. It's not like these things are just produced every single day. The junk shop didn't have very many. So Winston got kind of lucky by finding that diary. And he's actually using it, so that's, I guess, good. Let's continue on, because Winston spots something that he does seem to value. He ends up calling it a paperweight. It's something that's heavy glass. It's curved on one side, flat on the other. So like kind of like a half circle type thing. It's got embedded coral in it, which the Mr. Charrington says is from, I believe, the Indian Ocean. I believe that's what he said. Yeah, it must have come from the Indian Ocean. They used to kind of embed it in the glass. That wasn't made less than 100 years ago, more by the look of it. So it's very old. And like I said, Winston thinks it's a paperweight. That's seemingly how he's going to use it. And again, he says it could be potentially compromising. If you have something like that that's that old, that stands out, if people see you with it, well, they're going to start to ask questions. So he ends up buying that for $4. They end up going upstairs into this secluded room, which is outlined with a bunch more products, but like stuff to buy. And it seems like the room was meant to be secret because it was heavily kind of concealed. They had to light a lamp. They go slowly up the steep and worn stairs along a tiny passage into a room which did not give on the street. So you couldn't see it from the street. And it was along a tiny passage. So what was so secret about this room? Why would they have a room like this? Because it's probably not just to display all the other junk in the junk shop for people to buy. I don't know. Winston continues. He contemplates renting the room. He gets a sort of like nostalgia and ancestral memory from being in the room. And he starts to think, oh, okay, if I just rent this out, I could come here and live here like once a week or whatever. spend most of my time back at the Victory Mansion, and then spend 1 day a week here in this room. And the room was meant to be lived in. It wasn't always this place just to display the junk shop's stuff for people to buy. I don't know if I just repeated myself there, but the guy, Charrington, actually says, we lived here till my wife died. And he's selling the furniture. There's a bed up there. Winston gets attracted to, and there's books of rubbish. And Winston mentions how any super, super old books, like the party just kind of not even rectified. I think they just got rid of them. Winston gets fixated on this picture in the rosewood frame. It's of St. Clement's Dane. It's a church, which is still there in Oceania. It's located outside the Palace of Justice, but it's been bombed to ruins. And you don't really know how old the church is because they've wiped the records of the church. I'm just going to go out there and assume. Winston mentions anything that's super, super old is attributed to the time period called the Middle Ages, right? The Middle Ages, where the party still ruled. They're not giving any sort of credence to the capitalist period of Oceania. Nothing can be from that period. The party always persists, or at least that's the goal I think that the party is trying to do. The goal that they have. So he's fixated on this picture frame, St. Clement's Dane, which again is a church. He ends up leaving the junk shop. And like I said earlier, you don't really want to be caught in this place and where the proles live. You're just asking for trouble. And lo and behold, he sees the girl from the fiction department, the girl that was with the human jukebox, the duck talking guy, the girl who stared at him from the cafeteria, the girl with the dark hair who says he has a bad feeling she's spying on him. He sees her. He's 10 meters away from her, and she sees him and walks away. So Winston gets all stressed out. He gets paralyzed in fear. He starts walking completely opposite direction. He's been found out. Oh my God, all his convictions are true. She really is a spy. This just confirms it. And he doesn't know what to do. He actually contemplates catching up to her. And he's like, in the book it reads she only left 3 minutes ago. If I walk fast, I could catch up to her and I can bludgeon her with a stone and kill her. He's actually starting to think this. He's worried that she saw him. He ends up not doing this. He ends up coming to his senses, I guess, in a way that, no, I can't kill her. This just, what I'm going to do, what he says is, hey, I'm going to go to the community center, just spend the night there. That way I have an alibi. I could say, oh, I was here all night. And nobody would know because nobody else is there. But this kind of begs the question, what was the girl doing there? I guess the first thing is we have to find out is the girl really a spy? If she's not, what is she doing there? I'm almost starting to think that she's not a spy. I guess we're going to find out in chapter 2, but something tells me that she's there for the similar reasons that Winston is. I don't know. I just got a weird feeling about that. I don't think she's a spy. The Parsons kids? Yeah, I think so. But the girl from the fiction department? I don't know. So eventually Winston makes it back home, and he's kind of contemplating on his time in prole land. And he ponders on the uselessness of fear and pain. And he says how you're never really fighting anything external. It's always you're fighting yourself. That always comes first, is the internal struggles. Even if somebody's out there trying to kill you, you're trying to fight through your pain and fear of not getting killed. And he says one is always fighting against one's own body. And it's interesting Winston talks about fighting against when he was doing the morning routine to get ready for work. He's fighting against his lungs were really bad, his flexibility, his ulcer. We've heard him talk about his ulcer and how it like itches and like nags at him. So Winston doesn't feel good that he saw this girl. He's starting to predict his own demise. The thought police are going to be coming after him. I mean, he thought about this when he wrote in the diary too for the first time. He starts to think about O'Brien. That comes back to him. The dream of O'Brien comes back to him, and where O'Brien says, the place that they will meet, we shall meet in the place where there is no darkness. And he starts to think, okay, it's kind of a metaphor. The place where there's no darkness is the future. The place where there is no darkness was the imagined future which one would never see, but which by foreknowledge one could mystically share in. And then part 7 ends. Wow. I am really curious. I mean, we found out a lot of information in this chapter about, like, a little more information on the proles, where they live, some information from the old man, some information on the junk shop where he bought the diary. But really the big, like, table turner here, like head turner, was this girl from the fiction department that he finds in the same place where he's at. And I just want to know, is she really a spy? I do not know, but guys, I can't wait to read chapter 2 now. Here are the discussion questions. Go ahead and just take a glimpse of them. I will have these in the description as well as pinned the top comment on this video as well. And guys, thank you very much for listening. Really, really appreciate it. We're going to be on to chapter 2 next. Thank you guys so much. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.